Hans Zuberman's story was a little like that. When I found it within the book thief's words, I realized that we passed each other once in a while during that period, though neither of us scheduled a meeting. Personally, I had a lot of work to do, and as for Hans, I think he was doing his best to avoid me. On the whole, his time in the Great War had astonished him from the moment he entered the army. It was like a serial. Day after day, after day, after day. The conversation of bullets, resting men, the best dirty jokes in the world, and cold sweat, that malignant little friend, outstaying its welcome in his armpits and trousers. He enjoyed the card games the most, followed by the few games of chess, despite being thoroughly pathetic at it, and the music. Always the music.
When Liesl next visited, minus Rudy, the opportunity presented itself. It was pickup day. The mayor's wife opened the door, and she was not holding the bag like she normally would. Instead, she stepped aside and motioned with her chalky hand and wrist for the girl to enter. "I'm just here for the washing." Liesl's blood had dried inside her. It crumbled. She almost broke into pieces on the steps. The woman said her first word to her then. She reached out, cold-fingered, and she said, "Wart, wait." When she was sure the girl had steadied, she turned and walked hastily back inside. "Thank God," Liesl exhaled, "she's getting it. It being the washing." What the woman returned with, however, was nothing of the sort. When she came and stood with impossibly frail steadfastness, she was holding a tower of books against her stomach, from her navel to the beginning of her breasts. She looked so vulnerable in the monstrous doorway. Long, light eyelashes, and just the slightest twinge of expression. A suggestion. "Come and see," it said. "She's going to torture me," Liesl decided. "She's going to take me inside, light the fireplace, and throw me in, books and all. Or she'll lock me in the basement without any food." For some reason, though, most likely the lure of the books, she found herself walking in. The squeaking of her shoes on the wooden floorboard made her cringe, and when she hit a sore spot, inducing the wood to groan, she almost stopped. The mayor's wife was not deterred. She only looked briefly behind and continued on to a chestnut-colored door. Now her face asked a question. "Are you ready?" Liesl craned her neck a little, as if she might see over the door that stood in her way. Clearly, that was the cue to open it. "Jesus Mary," she said it out loud, the words distributed into a room that was full of cold air and books. Books everywhere. Every wall was armed with overcrowded yet immaculate shelving. It was barely possible to see the paintwork. There were all different styles and sizes of lettering on the spines of the black, the red, the gray, the every-colored book. It was one of the most beautiful things Liesl Memminger had ever seen. With wonder she smiled that such a room existed. Even when she tried to wipe the smile away with her forearm, she realized instantly that it was a pointless exercise. She could feel the eyes of the woman traveling her body, and when she looked at her, they had rested on her face. There was more silence than she had ever thought possible. It extended like an elastic, dying to break. The girl broke it. "Can I?" The two words stood among acres and acres of vacant, wooden, floored land. The books were miles away. The woman nodded. "Yes, you can."
Enter the struggle. A few hundred miles northwest of Stuttgart, far from book thieves, mayors' wives, and Himmel Street, a man was sitting in the dark. It was the best place, he decided. It's harder to find a Jew in the dark. He sat on his suitcase, waiting. How many days had it been now? He had only eaten the foul taste of his hungry breath for what felt like weeks. Still nothing. Occasionally voices wandered past, and sometimes he longed for them to knuckle the door, to open it, to drag him out into the unbearable night. For now, he could only sit on his suitcase couch, hands under his chin, his elbows burning his thighs. The door was opened and shut, and a figure was crouched over him. The hand splashed at the cold waves of his clothes and the grimy currents beneath. A voice came down behind him. "Max," he whispered. "Max, wake up." His eyes did not do anything that shock normally describes. No slapping, no slapping, no jolt. Those things happen when you wake from a bad dream, not when you wake into one. No, his eyes dragged themselves open from darkness to dim. It was his body that reacted, shrugging upward and throwing out an arm to grip the air. The voice calmed him now. "Sorry it's taken so long. I think people have been watching me. And the man with the identity card took longer than I thought, but there was a pause. It's yours now. No great quality, but good, hopefully good enough to get you out of here if it comes to that." He crouched down and waved a hand at the suitcase. In his other hand, he held something felt heavy and flat. "Come on, up." Max obeyed, standing and scratching. He could feel the tightening of his bones. "The card is in this." It was a book. You should put the map in here too, in the directions. And there's a key, taped to the inside cover. He clipped open the case as quickly as he could and planted the book like a bomb. I'll be back in a few days. He lifted a small bag filled with bread, fat, and 3 small carrots. Next to it was a bottle of water. There was no apology. It's the best I could do. Door open, door shut. Alone again. What came to him immediately then was a sound. Everything was moving so desperately noisy in the dark when he was alone. Each time he moved, there was the sound of a crease. He felt it like a man in a paper suit of food. Max divided the bread into 3 parts and set 2 aside. The one in his hand he immersed himself in, chewing and gulping, forcing it down the dry corridor of his throat. The fat was cold and hard, scaling its way down, occasionally holding on. Big swallows tore them away and sent them alone. Then the carrots. Again he set 2 aside and devoured the 3rd. The noise was astounding. Surely the furrow himself would hear the sound of every orange crunch in his mouth. It broke his teeth with every bite. When he drank, he was positive that he was swallowing them. Next time, he advised himself to drink first. Later, to his relief, when the echoes left him, he found the courage to check with his fingers. Each tooth was still there, intact. He tried for a smile, but it didn't come. He could only imagine a meek attempt at a mouthful of broken teeth. For hours, he felt at them. He opened the suitcase and picked up the book. He could not read the title in the dark, and the gamble of striking a match seemed too great right now. When he spoke, it was the taste of a whisper. "Please," he said. "Please." He was speaking to a man he had never met, as well as a few other important details. He knew the man's name, Hans Huberman. Again he spoke to him, to the distant stranger. He pleaded, "Please."
It was a man a year older than himself, a German Jew named Erich Vandenberg, who taught him to play the accordion. The 2 of them gradually became friends due to the fact that neither of them was terribly interested in fighting. They preferred rolling cigarettes to rolling in snow and mud. They preferred shooting craps to shooting bullets. A firm friendship was built on gambling, smoking, and music, not to mention a shared desire for survival. The only trouble with this was that Erich Vandenberg would later be found in several pieces on a grassy hill. His eyes were open and his wedding ring was stolen. I shoveled up his soul with the rest of them and we drifted away. The horizon was color of milk, cold and fresh, poured out among the bodies. All that was really left of Erich Vandenberg was a few personal items and the fingerprinted accordion. Everything but the instrument was set home. It was considered too big. Almost with self-reproach, it sat on the makeshift bed at the base camp and was given to his friend, Hans Huberman, who happened to be the only man to survive.
He survived like this.
He didn't go into battle that day. For that, he had Erich Vandenberg to thank. More to the point, Erich Vandenberg and the sergeant's toothbrush. That particular morning, not too long before they were leaving, Sergeant Stefan Schneider paced into the sleeping quarters and called everyone to attention. He was popular with the men for his sense of humor and practical jokes, but more so for the fact that he had never followed anyone into the fire. He always went first. On certain days, he was inclined to enter the room of resting men and say something like, "Who comes from passing?" or "Who's good with mathematics?" or, in the fateful case of Hans Huberman, "Who's got neat handwriting?" No one ever volunteered, not after the first time he did it. On that day, an eager young soldier named Philip Schlink stood proudly up and said, "Yes, sir, I come from passing," and he was promptly handed a toothbrush and told to go to the shed house. When the sergeant asked who had the best penmanship, you can surely understand why no one was keen to step forward. They thought they might be first to receive a full hygiene inspection, or scrub an eccentric lieutenant's shit-trampled boots before they left. "Now come on," Schneider turned to them. Slapped down with oil, his hair gleamed, though a small piece was always upright and vigilant at the apex of his head. "At least one of you useless bastards must be able to write properly." Still no one stepped forward, but a voice stooped out and ambled toward the sergeant. It sat at his feet, waiting for a good kicking. It said, "Huberman, sir." The voice belonged to Erich Vandenberg. He obviously thought that today wasn't the appropriate time for his friend to die. At that moment, the voice was put forward again, moving a few others to make themselves heard. "Huberman, they echoed." Erich said, "Immaculate handwriting, sir, immaculate." It settled then. There was a circular, small-mouthed grin. "Huberman, you're it." The gangly young soldier made his way forward and asked what his duty might be. The sergeant sighed. "The captain needs a few dozen letters written for him. He's got terrible rheumatism in his fingers, or arthritis. He'll be writing them for him." There was no time to argue, especially with Schlink, when Schlink was sent to clean the toilets and the other one, Thacker, nearly killed himself licking the envelopes. His tongue was infection blue. Yes, sir, Hans nodded, and that was the end of it. His writing ability was dubious to say the least, but he considered himself lucky. He wrote the letters as best he could, while the rest of the men went into battle. None of them came back. He carried the accordion with him during the entirety of the war. When he tracked down the family of Erich Vandenberg in Stuttgart upon his return, Vandenberg's wife informed him that he could keep it. Her apartment was littered with them, and it upset her too much to look at that one in particular. The others were a reminder enough, as was her once shared profession of teaching it. He taught me to play, Hans informed her, as though it might help. Perhaps it did, for the devastated woman asked if he could play it for her, and she silently wept as he pressed the buttons and the keys of a clumsy blue Danube waltz. It was her husband's favorite. You know, Hans explained to her, he saved my life. The light in the room was small, and the air restrained. He, if there's anything you ever need. He slid a piece of paper with his name and address on it across the table. I'm a painter by trade. I'll paint your apartment for free, whenever you like. He knew it was useless compensation, but he offered anyways. The woman took the paper, and not long after, a small child wandered in and sat on her lap. This is Max, the woman said, but the boy was too young and shy to say anything. He was skinny, with soft hair, and his thick, murky eyes watched as the stranger played one more song in the heavy room. From face to face, he looked on as the man played and the woman wept. The different notes handled her eyes. Such sadness. Hans left. You never told me, he said to a dead Erich Vandenberg in the Stuttgart skyline. You never told me you had a son. After a momentary, head-shaken stoppage, Hans returned to Munich, expecting never to hear from those people again. What he didn't know was that his help would most definitely be needed, but not for painting, and not for another 20 years. Every day when they worked together, he would tell Liesel his stories. There was the Great War and how his miserable handwriting helped save his life, and the day he met Mama. He said that she was beautiful, once, and actually very quiet and spoken. Hard to believe, I know, but absolutely true. Each day there was a story, and Liesel forgave him if he told the same one more than once. On other occasions, when she was daydreaming, Papa would dab her lightly with his brush, right between the eyes. If he misjudged and there was too much on it, a small path of paint would dribble down the side of her nose. She would laugh and try to return the favor, but Hans Huberman was a hard man to catch out at work. It was there that he was most alive. Whenever they had a break to eat or drink, he would play the accordion, and it was this that Liesel remembered best. Each morning, while Papa pushed or dragged the paint cart, Liesel carried the instrument. Better that we leave the paint behind, Hans told her, than ever forget the music. When they paused to eat, he would cut up the bread, smearing it with what little jam remained from the last ration card. Or he'd lay a small slice of meat on top of it. They would eat together, sitting on their cans of paint, and with the last mouthful still in the chewing stages, Papa would be wiping his fingers, unbuckling the accordion case. Traces of breadcrumbs were in the creases of his overalls. Paint-speckled hands made their way across the buttons and raked over the keys, or held onto a note for a while. His arms worked the bellows, giving the instrument the air it needed to breathe. Liesel would sit each day with her hands between her knees in the long legs of daylight. She wanted none of those days to end, and it was always with disappointment that she watched the darkness stride forward.